Everyone has their quirks, things that make them original and set them apart from the rest. And yes, even hockey players can be a bit eccentric in their own way. Some may display more personality than others, but it's what's lying within their personalities that we're going to take a look at. In this video, I'm going to attempt to speculate and theorize, to the best of my ability, which personality quirk, we'll call them, that these few NHL players possess. Keep in mind that every particular person and case is different, and many live successful and fulfilling lives regardless. Throughout his career, and even prior to the NHL, Sidney Crosby has been known to be superstitious. But for Sid, it could very well be chalked up to much more. In fact, the 3-time Stanley Cup champion shows many classic signs of an obsessive-compulsive personality disorder. Symptoms of this personality quirk are, but certainly aren't limited to, a preoccupation with details, orderliness and rules, extreme perfectionism, hoarding worn or useless items, stiff, formal, or rigid mannerisms. While relating this to Sid, and speaking of his perfectionist tendencies, current head coach Mike Sullivan had this to say about the captain. What separates him from other elite players is his appetite to be the best, and his willingness and his drive to be the best, he says. And former teammate Craig Adams corroborated Sullivan's statement, saying, "He's able to pick things he thinks he needs to be better at, and he's very deliberate at practicing those things and working on those things all the time," Adams says. He's methodical about doing that on a daily basis. And in case you didn't know, Crosby is also very notorious for hoarding used, and I mean very used, equipment and various items. One example is his lucky cup, which he's been wearing consistently since midget hockey. Still the same one since midget. I give Heinze credit for fixing that thing, Crosby says. Besides holding on to the same jock for over 15 years, he's also been known to sport the same sweat-stained hat every season during post-game interviews. Crosby, while being known as one of the most classy individuals league-wide, is known to be very formal, candid, and socially reserved. One of many reasons he's respected off-ice just as much as on it. Now, if we take a step further and compare OCD symptoms, that's where the ritualistic behavior will come into play. And if you know Crosby at all, you know he's all about routine. Walking a certain route at home games to avoid the visitor's locker room, to tracing the McDonald's sign on Penguins ice before every game. OCPD or OCD, Crosby is definitely fondly loved as the creature of habit he is. And while this one may be the biggest stretch of the few, but even still, it's relevant to Brad Marchand regarding his previous behavior. Antisocial personality disorder is defined by these signs, but certainly not limited to disregard for right and wrong, being callous or disrespectful of others, hostility, significant irritability, agitation, aggression, or violence, lack of empathy for others, and lack of remorse about harming others, and failure to consider the negative consequences of behavior or learn from them. Now you might be asking, how does this relate to the little ball of hate? Well, Marchand, throughout his career, granted he has recently improved, was notorious for getting suspended constantly and making the same questionable plays that endangered the safety of other players. Regardless of the punishment he faced, as in suspension after suspension, Marchand continued to violate the rules while displaying at times aggression and violence. But after being suspended 6 times for a total of 19 games, the forward decided to clean up his act, and thankfully for him, has had a clean record enough not to be known as a repeat offender. And according to MayoClinic.org, there may be a reason for that. Quote, "Although antisocial personality disorder is considered lifelong, in some people, certain symptoms, particularly destructive and criminal behavior, may decrease over time. It's not clear whether this decrease is a result of aging or increased awareness of the consequences of antisocial behavior." End quote. Regardless, let's take a moment and give a round of applause for the Rat on such an accomplishment. PK Subin, one of the most admired in the league for his off-ice philanthropy. His $10 million donation to charity, among other things, have put him in the spotlight for good reason. But what if I were to tell you the motives here may seem noble, but they also could be very altruistic? Now, narcissistic personality disorder has the biggest stigma among all personality quirks that I've mentioned. But even still, while these people are definitely capable of doing good, there are often ulterior motives. A few signs of a true narcissist include, but certainly aren't limited to, displaying an unquenchable need for constant admiration. They often behave in an arrogant, haughty manner and may come across as conceited or boastful. They may also belittle, demean, or intimidate others. All in all, a true narcissist can appear to others as very toxic, because no one in their eyes can measure up to them, and any sort of criticism is often met with rage. So how does all of this relate to PK Subin? For starters, I'm going to let Subin's arch nemesis give you his opinion.
Like I said, I don't know why we're talking about him. That's kind of what he wants. He came in here, tried to make it about PK Subin, which is, what he does. You can let him talk about himself all night. I'm sure he'll give you guys enough lines. I'm not going to help that out.
Okay, now that we've obviously gotten the admiration and attention part out of the way, let's theorize a little more on the next relation. Remember how many teammates despised Subin in Montreal? How he was constantly dropping the gloves in practice? Or maybe how things went south in Nashville?
Well, I've talked to a lot of guys who have played with him, and they tell me there's not enough oxygen in the room for everybody.
There wasn't enough oxygen for everybody. Meaning, when you have a guy on your team that believes that he's the best thing since sliced bread, and isn't willing to listen to anyone concerning criticism, then he's naturally going to be a little despised after a while. Hence the reason, or much of the reason why Subin, as talented as he was, especially in his prime, couldn't make things work in the locker room. Again, narcissists can be good people, highly respected and loved, don't get me wrong, but it's their personality flaws that tend to make them the type that you want to tolerate in doses. As for PK Subin, he could very well be on his way to a new locker room sooner rather than later.